One day, I'm wandering around at the store after school, and I notice this super soaker. And I'm thinking, I can probably weaponize that. So I grab one and head home. And 10 minutes later, using a candle lighter, some duct tape, and lighter fluid, I've got an improvised flamethrower. Naturally, I have to test it out. So I grab a willing participant and head out back. And then I learned something interesting. You know that smell hair makes when you burn it? Turns out, it's the same for Furbies. Guess we're not so different after all. But I lied about that willing participant part, so I had to lay down a smokescreen of Febreze and flee the scene. And I figure, hey, why not pay my friend Pierre a visit? Partially because I like him, but mostly to establish an alibi. So we're sitting there in his basement, and I'm still thinking about what else I can do with the super soaker when it hits me. Oh we need to make a skeet gun. And I'm not talking about acts of aggression towards kitchenware. I have no interest in hunting plates for sport, nor anything that encourages the wearing of specialized vests. I'm talking about real skeet, the skeet of the people, that 2004 Urban Dictionary skeet. If this happened today, maybe we would have called it a nut gun. But back then, we weren't nutting. Nobody was nutting. We were skeeting. It was a different time. Our cultural leaders were people like Lil Jon and the Ying Yang Twins. We looked up to them, and as young men, their music served as very literal instruction manuals for how to live our lives. That's just how it was. My hands were tied. So we start looking for some sort of skeet substitute around his house. And obviously, for this stuff to be realistic, there's a pretty short list of criteria. This stuff had to be white, and it had to be thick. First, we tried soap. No dice. Turns out to be way too thick. Not impressive, not healthy, not interested. Next, we tried milk, which took us to the other end of the spectrum. It was way too thin and the opacity was all wrong. Had it been whole milk, we might have had something to work with, but this skim shit wasn't gonna cut it. Neither one of these DIY skeet solutions was even approaching the level of believability we were after. And we weren't about to settle for good enough. We need that good. That top tier goo. With the exception of some Elmer's glue, we had pretty much exhausted all of our options at Pierre's place. Plus, all of his stuff was French anyways, so all the soap had names I couldn't even pronounce. So, we had to go to the store. It's worth noting that at this point in time, we were 16 years old, so we had just gotten our licenses, and Pierre had just gotten a new car, which meant we were no longer limited by how far 2 cans of Monster Energy and a couple of skateboards could take us. The threat zone had just significantly expanded. So we go to the store and just start wandering around, not really knowing what we're looking for or where to find it, because it's not exactly something you can ask for help with. Excuse me, we're looking for something, white and, thick. Aisle 3, next to the juice. So we found ourselves, once again, looking at soap. This time though, there was a lot more than just niche French brands to choose from. So we had to do our due diligence and get to scrutinizing. First thing we do, pop the tops. Gotta let that goo breathe a little. See what it's all about. Try to get a sense of its personality. Let it talk to you. Color-wise, we were looking for something between a tofu and a coconut milk. But we probably would have been willing to settle for cannoli cream or maybe even a sea salt. But color was secondary. The consistency was all that really mattered. We knew from our previous experiments that the drip factor was crucial. So we're turning these bottles upside down and timing their drip to make sure they're nice and slow. Looking for somewhere in the ballpark of maybe a centimeter per 10th of a second or some You know, trying to be scientific about this. But again, nothing was up to our standards, and we left the store empty-handed, but smelling delightful. So we're walking back to the car, trying to figure out where to try next.
What's that place with like beds and baths, but also more?
That's it! F***ing bubble bath! So we speeds get back into the store, and as discreetly as 2 16-year-old boys possibly can, we make our way to the bubble bath aisle. Round the corner, and boom! These bottles are looking thick. And you know, it's a very confusing time. Our bodies are going through a lot of changes. You can find a lot of things strangely arousing. Don't think that Pierre wouldn't a bottle. Do not underestimate him. There is no shame in his game. But we snap out of it. We need to focus. We're men of science, and we still have a job to do. We start running them through the tests, and they're passing with flying colors. Drip factor, immaculate. Aromatics, pop the tops. Intoxicating. Not to mention, they've got about 50 different color options. They've got every shade of white known to North America. Star White, Ivory Keys, Picket Fence, Taylor's Chalk, Tanner, Cody, Dylan. The gang's all here, bruh. So we grab a couple bottles, trade them for paper, and rush back to the car to get everything assembled. Super Soakers were built on the premise of all fire being friendly. And I don't think the creators ever imagined they would be used as flamethrowers or makeshift bioweapons. Because this thing doesn't have a safety, and it's been sitting in Pierre's car for the last hour, basically just edging, ready to pop off at any moment. So the second Pierre wraps his hands around this thing, it just busts all over the ceiling of his car. I guess his burly baguette breakers were just too much for that little eclair to bear. And now we're sitting there looking like we just had an unsavory encounter with a group of Japanese businessmen. But you know what? It didn't matter, because we had found our skeet. And now, all that was left to do was share our discovery with the world. Hey there, things are about to get messy, so I wanted to take a second use science to preemptively excuse my behavior. Did you know that the prefrontal cortex of the brain doesn't fully develop until somewhere around age 25? It's true. This is the part of the brain that's responsible for empathy, morality, self-awareness, and the ability to imagine long-term consequences. Basically, all the things that make us human. This means that at age 16, you are, essentially, not a human. And non-humans aren't judged by the same standards humans are they? Kangaroos start fights and smoke weed, otters are necrophiliacs, and ducks are rapists. And yet, I've never seen any of them in handcuffs. Have you? I'm not saying you shouldn't be held responsible for the things you do at 16, but I don't need to, because science says it for me. Don't think too hard about it. It's just bubble bath. Back to the story. We're too eager to go somewhere where our faces were not just captured on security cameras. So we figure, hey, why not just try it out right here? So we start scanning the horizon for movement, and it isn't long before we see someone coming out of the store. Belted khaki shorts, tucked in t-shirt, crispy white court classics paired with some socks the same pure milky tone as the calves they're clinging to. Clearly, someone who can handle a joke. Target acquired. So Pierre twists the keys and we start creeping towards the store. Our future friend sees us coming and he stops to let us pass. Very polite. But we too are polite. Pierre plays return the favor, bringing the car to a gentle stop and motioning for him to go ahead. He has no choice but to comply. Good. As he passes, Pierre notices that his scalp is looking a bit dry. That's bad news. If left unchecked, that could lead to dandruff or even skin cancer. Not on our watch. As soon as he was safely past the car, Pierre pumps the Super Soaker and delivers 4 ounces of vital nutrients to the back of his head, restoring his moisture balance and shielding him from further damage. After that, he floored it. No thanks necessary. It felt good helping people, so we quickly assumed the role of guardian angels to the dry, moisture-deprived people of the sidewalks. We became like a hatchback-based version of one of those lotion kiosks at the mall that really wants to moisturize you, except more aggressive. And freelance. And unsurprisingly, when you live in a city that was built as a you to nature, just about everything lacks essential moisture. Grandparents, athletes, mathletes, triathletes, and especially peaches. We had our work cut out for us, so we started pulling nights and weekends to meet the demand. We were basically working part-time at Krispy Kreme, just on permanent glazing duty, and not actually making donuts. After a while, we've got our routine down to a sticky science. The weekend hits, we don our caps and aprons, and shoot over to the Skeet supply store to re-up on that ranch, secure the substance, then, with elixir in hand, we bow our heads to say a quick prayer to imbue the goo with our well wishes and good intentions. Seal it with a kiss, then we hit them streets. We'd optimized every part of the operation. The capacity on the Super Soaker had been upgraded to 2 liters, and our bubble bath knowledge was reaching sommelier level. We're keeping detailed notes on color, bouquet, viscosity. We've got scoring systems and rankings. We're making choices and pairings based on the humidity level, wind factor, phase of the moon. We had really elevated things. We had turned this hobby into an art form. But eventually, the novelty wore off. The city had been thoroughly moisturized, our project had run its course, and we lost interest. It was time to move on to something else. We didn't want word getting out that we were a couple of secret bukkake boys, so up until that point, we had kept our special community outreach program between just the 2 of us. But then, one day, out of the blue, an old friend reached out. It was Maddie. We used to run in a skate crew together a few years prior, but then he moved, and it turns out our friendship wasn't worth skateboarding the 3 miles it took to continue, so we had lost touch. But now, we had wheels, and that minor barrier to the continuation of our friendship didn't feel like so much of an obstacle anymore. Within the hour, he's at Pierre's place and we're picking up right where we left off. A lot has changed since we last saw each other. Our voices are different, we've all got pubes, our moms aren't choosing our hairstyles anymore. We had a lot of catching up to do, so we start swapping stories about what sorts of trouble we've been getting into, and eventually the conversation steers towards the topic of skeet. At that point in time, Pierre and I were about 3 months clean. Any and all desire to send strangers to the semen dimension had completely vacated itself from my heart. But this was Maddie. This felt like a special occasion. So we show him the gun and start recounting our past lives as evangelists, performing drive-by baptisms into the Church of Nut. And naturally, Maddie wants in, but we are completely dry. We haven't seen or touched the white stuff in months. So we pile in the car and head to our usual spot, leapfrog to the bubble bath aisle, gather the goo, and make our way to the checkout. It was Christmas time, so the whole place had transformed into Santa's workshop. And as we approached the register, bubble bath in hand, making plans for a white Christmas of our own, I noticed this elf behind the counter give me a look. He's got a disturbing sparkle in his eye and he's fighting the urge to smirk.
Just these for you?
Mm-hmm.
Did you find everything all right?
Yeah.
Naturally.
Excuse me?
Nothing. Are you sure this is going to be enough for all 3 of you?
Yeah. We should be good.
Splendid. So is this one your favorite?
Yeah, it's okay.
Right. You boys sure buy a lot of bubble bath. Tell me all the dirty details.
So, whether we'd been going to the same cashier without realizing it, or a word had gotten around, I don't know. But apparently, we had developed a bit of a reputation, and he was connecting dots that weren't even there. No matter what I do, that elf's words will forever be crystallized in my mind. The rest of that night is a blur. One thing I do remember though, is that later that night we saw one of our friends at a red light. They pulled up beside us, and when they rolled down their window to say hi, Maddie turned this man into a mime. Hands up, mouth agape, fully white face, incapable of speech. And when the light turned green, we rolled away and left him disoriented and gasping for air. He's probably the only person to ever experience an avalanche in the middle of a desert. Anyways, moral of the story, if you're a 16-year-old boy repeatedly buying bubble bath with your friend, someone is going to notice. So switch up the stores. Also, elves are perverts.